Metal shrieks as a blue Dodge pickup truck smashes through Gate 3 of Augusta National Golf Club, tearing the 20-foot barrier from its hinges. The gate rides the truck's hood as Charles Harris accelerates down the manicured driveway, his weathered hand gripping the wheel, the .38 revolver tucked against his waistband as he roars toward the clubhouse. Seconds later, he bursts through the pro shop doors, dragging a terrified chauffeur at gunpoint. The room freezes. Staff and visitors stand paralyzed as Harris brandishes his weapon, his face contorted with fury. Without warning, he fires a single shot into the polished floor. The explosion echoes through the room, leaving behind the smell of gunpowder and 5 new hostages. Meanwhile, lining up his shot on the 16th hole, totally oblivious to the danger, is the reason Harris is here: President Ronald Reagan. Charles Harris. Augusta National was no mystery to Charles Harris. The local Georgian had worked concessions at the Masters during his high school years, and like many locals, he'd even snuck onto the grounds to retrieve golf balls from the ponds behind the exclusive cottages. In those younger days, Harris had briefly tried his hand at golf on the hard scrabble course known as the Cabbage Patch, but frustrated with the game's precision demands, he abandoned his clubs, handing them to a young boy before walking away for good. Athletics had always drawn Harris to more physical pursuits. Built with the thick shoulders of a natural athlete, he played as a lineman, linebacker, and fullback for the semi-pro Augusta Eagles well into his 30s. Football, barroom brawls, and car wrecks had sculpted his body with an assortment of scars and half-healed injuries. 6 broken noses, a ruptured spleen, and battered knees told the story of a man accustomed to physical confrontation. In 1980, Harris enthusiastically supported Ronald Reagan's presidential campaign, believing he represented everything the United States needed. On election night, he excitedly called up his friends, proudly announcing that his man had won. However, by 1983, at age 45, Harris's optimism had deteriorated, and he found his life in a downward spiral. His marriage was dissolving. The passing of his father, Harry, a Navy veteran and Augusta police detective, whom Harris described as being more like a brother to him, had left an emptiness which he filled with alcohol. To make matters worse, his career as a millwright at the local paper mill, where he'd worked for 23 years and served as a union steward, had recently ended with his dismissal. Friends described him as a troubled individual who had become increasingly despondent. The incident unfolds. On the morning of October 22, 1983, Charles Harris and his sister Harriet were driving past Augusta National when they noticed unusual security activity. Recognizing a county deputy, Harriet inquired about the commotion. The officer informed them that President Reagan was there to play golf, boasting that the security was so tight that not even an ant could crawl onto the grounds. Harris absorbed this information silently. Later that day, after returning home and having what he insisted were only 2 drinks, Harris watched a television report about U.S. Steel laying off thousands of workers due to foreign competition. The news struck a nerve with the recently unemployed millwright. As his frustration mounted, Harris decided to drive to the club and speak directly with the president about the nation's economic struggles. If he could just get a chance to talk to Reagan, perhaps the situation might change. At 2:15 p.m., under cloudy skies, Harris approached Gate 3 on Washington Road in his blue 1974 Dodge pickup truck, nicknamed Old Blue, with high springs that allowed it to clear obstacles. Finding the entrance unmanned, despite the heightened security elsewhere, he paused to lock the hubs for 4-wheel drive. Then, with deliberate purpose, he accelerated toward the gate, crashing through and yanking the 20-foot-wide barrier off its hinges. With the gate teetering on his truck's front end, Harris barreled down the driveway toward the clubhouse. There, he grabbed his .38 caliber revolver, not to harm anyone, he would later claim, but simply, quote, to get where I needed to go. Harris encountered Roy Sullivan, a club chauffeur, and marched him at gunpoint into the pro shop. Chris Hardy, a young clerk inside, recalled, quote, Roy's eyes were big as saucers. Upon entering, Harris released Sullivan with unusual instructions, quote, if you look behind my seat in the truck, there's a bottle of tequila, and I'd be pleased if you drank it all. his demeanor shifted as he confronted the people inside. 2 White House aides, David Fisher and Lanny Wiles, along with Jim Armstrong, the general manager, and other employees. Waving his pistol, Harris warned, quote, "This is no joke." Harris's demand was singular and unwavering, quote, "I want to see that son of a bitch on the golf course." Agitated and unpredictable, he fired a single shot into the floor to demonstrate his seriousness. When the telephone rang, a member's wife inquiring about her clubs, Harris answered curtly, quote, "Ma'am, we ain't playing no golf here today." He slammed down the receiver. As word of the hostage situation spread across the immaculate grounds, the tranquil afternoon at the United States' most exclusive golf sanctuary descended into chaos. The standoff. Word of the armed intruder reached Reagan as he approached the 16th hole. Secret Service agents immediately mobilized, their training kicking in. But the president himself made an unexpected decision. Rather than being whisked away to safety, Reagan insisted on attempting to defuse the situation by speaking directly with Harris. From the fairway, Reagan was handed one of the world's earliest mobile phones, a bulky 2-pound device that had only become commercially available days before. The president placed a call to the pro shop, where Harris was holding his hostages. Speaking into the primitive handset, he said, quote, "This is the President of the United States. This is Ronald Reagan. I understand you want to talk to me. Would you talk to me?" The line crackled with static. Harris, convinced this was a ploy, and that he was hearing a recording rather than the actual president, remained silent. Reagan persisted, quote, "If you are hearing me, will you please tell me, and we can have that talk that you want." Met with continued silence, Reagan tried again, but Harris, frustrated by the poor connection, yanked the phone from the wall in anger. Meanwhile, a tactical response was forming around the clubhouse. Sharpshooters positioned themselves near the practice green. Helicopters hovered overhead, and local police surrounded the area. Inside the pro shop, Harris was gradually releasing his hostages. Store clerk Chris Hardy, 23 years old at the time, had claimed to be just 19, hoping Harris would go easier on him. His plan worked, as he was let go first. Soon after, Harris also allowed White House aide David Fisher to leave to supposedly arrange a meeting with the president. Lanny Wiles, the remaining presidential advance man, found himself staring down the barrel of Harris's .38 revolver. He would later recall, quote, "If you've never been on the wrong end of a .38, it looks about the size of a water pitcher." In a tense moment, Harris pressed the gun between Wiles' eyes, prompting the terrified aide to plead for his life. As the standoff continued, Harris discovered 2 more people hiding in the bathroom when he kicked in the door: club professional Dave Spencer and an unidentified woman who fainted at the sight of his weapon. The woman eventually regained consciousness and crawled out, while Spencer remained a hostage. With communications failed and the situation escalating, Secret Service agents finally convinced Reagan to evacuate. The president was ushered into his bulletproof limousine, which sped away from the grounds, accompanied by an open convertible carrying 10 agents in golfing attire, armed with Uzi submachine guns. Harris watched this departure on the pro shop television, realizing his chance to speak with Reagan was slipping away. Inside the shop, Wiles employed every bit of his political charm to calm the increasingly agitated gunman, distracting him with talk of stiff drinks. This momentary diversion created an opportunity. Harris asked Wiles to find him some vodka, and the presidential aide seized his chance to escape, rushing outside to safety instead. Reflecting on the Secret Service's focus on protecting only the president, Wiles later quipped, quote, "That's when I realized you're expendable when you just carry the coat." Just a talk. By 4:20 p.m., barely 2 hours after crashing through Gate 3, Harris reached a pivotal realization. Surrounded by law enforcement, and with his hopes of meeting the president dashed, he laid down his weapon, later explaining, quote, "With Reagan gone, I put my gun down and figured I might as well take my punishment." His surrender came after the final hostage, Dave Spencer, managed to escape during a moment of confusion when food was brought in for Harris. When Secret Service agents recovered Harris's .38 revolver, they claimed it wouldn't have fired due to a bent trigger guard, supposedly damaged from Harris using it to strike people during his time as a bouncer at local clubs. Harris defiantly picked up the gun and fired through a window, proving them wrong with the day's second and final gunshot. Nevertheless, he maintained that if harming the president had been his intention, quote, "I'd have driven up to him and done it. I just wanted to talk to him." Reagan refused to let the security breach derail his plans. He spent the night in the Eisenhower cabin as scheduled and returned the next morning to complete his round of golf, even as workers repaired the damaged gate. Meanwhile, Harris was initially charged with threatening the president's life, but federal charges were ultimately dropped. Instead, he faced state charges of kidnapping, false imprisonment, and criminal damage to property. He pled guilty and received a 10-year sentence, of which he served 5 years in Georgia's state prison system. Released in 1987, Harris remained under parole supervision until 1989 and was monitored by the Secret Service for 4 years. He returned to the Augusta area, reunited with his wife Eleanor, found employment at a chemical plant, and became active in his Methodist church as Sunday school superintendent and lay leader. He passed away in 2007.